I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. This summer, the state utility regulator announced $50 million in penalties for operators that failed to meet customer service standards in 2025, with the other 7 audited electric, gas, and water utilities reportedly meeting all of their performance standards. To discuss this accountability, work, and more, we're joined in the studio by Rory, chair of the State Public Service Commission. Thanks for making the time, Rory.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Well, I imagine every utility, whether it's gas, electric, or water, is racking up some number of unhappy customers during the year, but I'm guessing customer service standards don't have a 100% satisfaction guarantee. So what are the expectations generally, and are they set in conjunction with the stakeholders, or do you at the PSC and the Department of Public Service get to assign the benchmark sort of unilaterally?
So, great question. And I think to answer that, you got to go back and understand the role utilities play in our lives. It's each utility has its own franchise territory and they're monopolies. And so competition isn't necessarily something that encourages superior performance in certain areas such as customer service. So we set up this program in the 90s to basically monitor, assess, and understand certain performance criteria that utilities have in terms of dealing with their customers. For most customers, you get a bill in the mail after 30 days, you pay the bill, and that's the relationship. But every now and then a problem happens. You have to call in, you have to have a service technician come by. And in those instances, when you're dealing with the utility outside the norm of simply paying your bill, we want to make sure the utility is responsive and attentive and focused on addressing customers' needs as they arrive as promptly as possible. So these customer needs and the metrics have been identified over the course of years. They've evolved over time. It's nothing that the Commission has done arbitrarily. As everything we do, it's usually part of an ongoing proceeding area where utilities, stakeholders, private citizens, all of us can get together, talk through the need for and the use of the different metrics and determining how to come up with the scores. So all of that is part of a process that we do. We've been doing this for many years now. Looking back over the last few years, we've collected over $100 million from the various utilities for different performance issues that we've identified through this process. Mm-hmm. And we see improvements in each utility. Even though some have continued to fail on some metrics, we see continuous improvement towards achieving the desired goals that we've set for them. So we see this as a really effective tool for driving the change we want to see, and we work to identify those changes periodically and modify them as needed.
Well, I want to come back to the idea of incentivizing better customer service, but in terms of how you wrap your arms around the work that these utilities are doing, where does the feedback come from? Are you getting people, ratepayers, reaching out to you, and that's how you do this? Are the utilities themselves collecting some sort of customer feedback? Where does this data come from?
Great question. And it's a combination. There's no one single source. There are a variety of customer surveys for some utilities. In some cases, it's emails to customers and the response to those emails. And in other cases, we collect the data monthly through the utilities themselves reporting back on their performance on certain metrics. So it's a variety of different sources where the information comes from. And what we've done in this most recent order, we made a number of recommendations to the utilities on how to streamline that process, make it more unified, more consistent across all the utilities. So we're taking measurements in a similar way, we're doing the surveys in a similar way, and it's more consistent across different service territories. But again, we've been doing this for many years. We've learned a lot as we've gone forward, and as with everything, it's a learning process. We take what we learn from each year, apply it to the next, and make improvements as needed.
Well, are there any recurring customer service shortcomings that you're finding year after year?
Right. So some utilities have failed certain metrics more than 1 year in a row. For example, Central Hudson, they failed their complaint rate last year and the year before. And as a result, we've doubled effectively the penalty assessed. But even though they failed 2 years in a row, they've improved in their performance year over year, suggesting that the performance metrics are having the desired effect of improving performance. So hopefully next year coming, when we do this again, we'll find that their performance has continued to improve along a pace. They'll meet the metrics and they won't be assessed a penalty. And that's literally what this is designed to do, drive performance. We would love for the utilities to score perfectly and do the job and meet expectations of customers. But if they don't, the penalties are assessed, the shareholders take a hit, and those dollars recovered go to ratepayers.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and I'm David Lombardo. And our guest is Rory Christian, Chair and CEO of the State Public Service Commission, which recently handed down penalties for 5 utilities that failed to meet their customer service standards in 2025. Well, can you talk about how the financial penalties are assessed? Because I'm just a cynical, jaded reporter, and I always imagine, whether it's a utility or some other large business, that they might bake into their budget penalties and fees and sort of think of this as the cost of doing business. So how do you ensure that you're actually hitting them where it hurts and not just necessarily making it so that they bake this into their bottom line so that they say, yeah, it could be worth it to respond faster, but the penalty is less than it would cost to hire X more people or invest X more dollars into this and avoiding that penalty?
So again, this is not something we do in a vacuum. It's developed over the course of many months in discussion with the utility stakeholders and members of staff in the commission. So in developing the metrics, we try to tie the metrics with achievable levels of performance that we expect and we know the utilities can achieve. And we do this with a full understanding of everyone involved. So we're never going to create a metric so easy to achieve that it's, there's nothing to do. Again, the goal is to get them to deliver results to customers. And if they're unable to deliver those results, assess a financial penalty that encourages them to do so. So we size the penalties, we size the metrics, all with that goal in mind, to make sure that we can get that result. And again, time after we've done this now, the 5 years I've been chair, we've seen continuous improvement in certain areas, particularly after the pandemic. So we think it's having the desired impact. We have evidence of that. And again, we'll continuously refine as the years go on to improve as needed.
But when I think about this year's announcement compared to last year's announcement, same utilities failing to hit some of their customer service targets. So is there reason to think that they're just going to continue to fail on these points, or is there ever a future where they're all going to hit their customer service goals?
Well, like I said, the utilities that we've seen, and I'll use Central Hudson as an example, just to use metrics as an illustrative purpose, they have a goal of 1 for customer service response rate. 2 years ago, they had a score of an 8. They were 8 times over what they should have been. Most recently, they had a score of 1.6 or 1.69 or something like that. So much closer to the 1 that they're supposed to achieve. That's a huge improvement, even though they've still failed. And that shows me that, at least in the case of Central Hudson and in the other examples like that, they are understanding the importance of the metrics. They're taking proactive steps to address the issue and improve over time. And that's what we want to see. We want to see them improve over time. Yeah.
And the negative revenue adjustments are credited to customers or deferred until the next rate case. But for context, if we're talking about $50 million, that seems like a small fraction of what ratepayers are ultimately paying throughout the year. So is there any reason to think that people are going to feel that when it gets redistributed across thousands of ratepayers, if not millions?
They absolutely do. In many instances, when we've done a rate case, these negative revenue adjustments have been instrumental in helping us to have rate impacts that are lower than they otherwise would have been. So they definitely are feeling the impacts in the rate case. And
Can you quantify that? I mean, what sort of relief are we talking about to some of these customers, whether it's NYSEG, RG&E, Central Hudson, National Grid, or Liberty Utilities?
Well, it's going to vary year by year. It's going to vary case by case. We're taking many steps, and we've talked about this in the past. We're taking many steps through the rate case process, making it more open and transparent, creating more opportunities for different ways to manage the rate process from start to finish. The governor recently enacted some legislation extending the time frame that we have for engaging in rate cases from 11 months to 18, which is going to offer us 15, which is going to offer us a great deal of time to further work through these processes. So this one instance, this $50 million for this year is 1 year, one specific area. We also do management and operations audits. Through those, we also similarly assess NRAs. So these aren't the only ones that we identify that ultimately help ratepayers. And I wish I could tell you the total number off the top of my head right now, but ultimately, when we do this, it does benefit the ratepayers. I can't speak to the exact numbers, but I can tell you if we weren't to do this, two things would happen. Customers would have worse performance, and their rates would still be higher. And that's an outcome we don't want. And so this is designed to address those two issues, lower the rates, improve performance, and I think it's achieving that goal.
So in this year's case, the press release that went out noted that NYSEG and RG&E are challenging the assessment of their performance metrics, arguing that their underperformance was due to conditions they couldn't control, like the severity of storms in 2025, as well as economic issues. Is there a process for grading on a curve, so to speak, or what happens if you ultimately don't reach an agreement on this evaluation?
So the document you're talking about is something they filed a petition asking us to review and change the process we've already negotiated and have in place, citing their view that weather and other events are the reason why they were unable to meet the goals. They also cited, I believe, the belief that many customers were calling because of higher rates, raising their complaint rate. So those are two things I think they cited in their petition. Ultimately, we're going to look at it. It's under review right now, so I can't speak to the specifics behind it.
But can you review something based on those concerns? Are those, as we think about in sports, reviewable types of plays?
We do. And one of the things we do in all our reviews, we make it really clear what are weather-driven events that are causing some of these drivers versus non-weather-driven events. And we try to frame those out to show the impact of extreme weather. We had fewer extreme weather events this year, but the impacts did skew the results in some instances, and we identified that. So we do try to take into consideration factors outside of the control. But again, all of this is something that we negotiate in advance, and we try to do in agreement with all parties and stakeholders involved. So it's never going to be something that's just arbitrary and made up. It's done with the goal of identifying the best path towards achieving the outcomes we want to see.
And after a quick break, we'll have more with Rory Christian, Chair and CEO of the State Public Service Commission. Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com. This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and I'm David Lombardo. We're continuing our conversation with Rory Christian, Chair and CEO of the Public Service Commission, which recently announced $50 million in penalties against 5 utilities that failed to meet their customer service standards for 2025. Are complaints about higher bills something that you consider when determining whether someone has met their customer service standards for a given year?
We look at all complaints. And in terms of complaints, one of the key things we're looking at is the speed with which they're addressed. Is somebody going to be waiting on hold for 30 minutes? We've heard that complaint, and I remember during billing issues with some utilities a few years ago, that was a recurring theme, and that certainly drove poor performance for some of the utilities in New York State, with customers experiencing long wait times, and ultimately not being addressed promptly and efficiently. And we've been working with those utilities to address that issue. We look at the entirety of the customer experience, from cost to how they interact with the utilities, to the level of service they receive, how frequently they have outages, how long those outages may be, and we try to drive performance with the goal of making sure any adverse effects are minimized to the customer as possible, and that includes ensuring rates are as low as they can possibly be.
You're investigating debt collection practices as well as some of the billing practices by some of the utilities. Is that something that's already incorporated into the reviews, how they approach these practices and potential concerns about them?
Yeah, so again, I mentioned earlier we do something called a management and operations audit. That's a practice that we instigated many years ago and continue to this day. We do it on a rolling basis with each utility, and then sometimes we do special audits when a particular issue arises to ensure that we can be prompt in dealing with an issue that's clear and present. We're definitely looking into that issue right now, and that's an ongoing matter that's before us that we're checking out.
But are you saying, though, that things like concerns about debt collection or concerns about billing have been factored into the customer service review in the past, and therefore you probably have a good amount of data based on those previous collection efforts as you begin this new investigation?
Yeah, we do have data on it. We are looking into it, and I can't speak to the data that we have. But again, we're collecting information from the utilities, from the third parties that they may or may not use. Different utilities operate in different ways, and we're looking at that information as part of our ongoing work.
If the financial penalties are the stick, are there carrots for good customer service, or maybe service that goes above and beyond the bare minimum?
So we try to manage that as best as we can. We do have some degree of carrots, but again, at the end of the day, the relationship with the utilities, we want to maintain one where the expectation is meet the customer's needs as best as humanly possible. If they do a better job of that, that's great, but that's not going to necessarily lead to an outsized reward. We've had conversations about the level of compensation utilities have, and we don't want to create a situation where people think utilities are simply being rewarded for doing their job, which again, they should be answering calls quickly. They should be making their visits on time. They shouldn't be providing significant numbers of estimated bills on a recurring basis. These are things we want to see happen far less, and we want to see customers having a good experience, a good relationship as best as humanly possible. So we don't necessarily overly incentivize that performance in that way. Where we do provide some incentives would be, say, in efficiencies. If a utility would, say, spend $20 million on staff and they're able to lower the cost through other efficiencies to $18 million, there's opportunities for positive revenue adjustments for that. But in terms of customer service, the goal is to minimize the negative experience as much as possible.
Is there any utility that has been doing year over year a good job and is constantly meeting its customer service standards? And if so, do you ever say to these other guys, why can't you be more like X, Y, and Z?
I mean, again, every utility is its own unique ecosystem, and that's why we have to look at them as individuals and not as a collective. But yeah, some utilities have consistently done better than others, and we do see that performance continue or improve over time, and that's exactly what we want to do. And we do have collaborations with the utilities where we talk to them. They definitely share information among themselves, best practices, tips and tricks, and so on and so forth. So we want to create an ecosystem where it's a reinforcing way for them to do better. We don't want to create challenges for excellence. We want to create opportunities for excellence. And this, we have found, has been a great way to achieve that.
So if listeners want to make sure their voices are heard for good or ill about the customer service that they're getting for their utility, what would you recommend they do so that their feedback is taken in consideration for future customer service reviews?
So they'll receive information from their utilities about customer service queries, fill those out, complete those, provide feedback. That's one way. They can also contact the Department of Public Service directly, either online or by phone, and provide us with feedback or lodge complaints. We try to make sure that any complaints that are escalated to us, we mediate with the utility and the customer to try to bring forward a resolution. So again, we will work with everyone to try to get a best outcome as possible.
Since you're here, I'm curious, what's the status of the Energy NY Development Initiative the government tasked the Department of Public Service with back in January to determine whether large data centers need to pay more for their energy or supply their own juice?
You're talking about Energize New York, I think.
Energize New York, yes.
Okay,
that was a test. You passed it.
All right. Woo.
You passed it.
Well, the governor recently announced her data center moratorium.
What?
You haven't heard
first
about
time hearing about
Oh,
this.
my goodness. But yeah, so that's the governor announcing the efforts with DEC and their permitting to ensure that we have the time to look at the issue and truly put our hands on it and ensure the best outcomes for New Yorkers. We see the problems that are arising in neighboring states and other states where data centers are proliferating, and we do not want to create that kind of a situation here for New Yorkers. So we're looking at the impacts of large loads coming in. What is that going to do to energy prices? What is that going to do to T&D delivery costs that the utilities are responsible for? And what is that going to do to the rest of the community and just overall conditions within the state? So we at the Commission, we're beginning the process of reviewing that through a generic environmental impact statement. And that's a process that we're going to continue working on for the next few months until we release a report with recommendations on how best we think to move forward.
And so, if I remember correctly, the generic environmental impact statement was part of the recent announcement.
Correct.
But the Energize New York, as you and I both know it's called, dates back to January. So, how do things go in that process now that you're about half of the year since that was announced?
Well, they're going to work together.
Okay.
Again, we do all these things in collaboration, and different actions taken by the commission work in collaboration together. So this is working in synergy towards that goal that the governor's recently announced as part of the data center plan. So, yeah, our efforts are underway.
And seemingly hand in glove with that is the development of new nuclear energy. What's going on in that front and your responsibility in terms of laying out what that pathway might look like?
Right. So with nuclear, this is part of the governor's nuclear backbone announcement. We currently have a little over 3.5 gigawatts of nuclear in New York State, and we want to add another 5 gigawatts of nuclear throughout the state over the next few years. NYPA is currently looking to develop 1 gigawatt in partnership with the federal government and other entities, and that's an ongoing effort right now. We at the Commission are responsible for developing a roadmap for addressing the remaining 4 gigawatts of that plan. And so with that goal in mind, we recently initiated an order. We released a joint paper we developed, a nuclear roadmap paper we developed with the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. We're seeking comments on that, and listeners and individuals interested in providing feedback are more than welcome to do so through the Department of Public Service website. But that proceeding is going to help us determine what steps are best to take to achieve that 4 gigawatt goal as efficiently, cost effectively as possible.
Well, we've been speaking with Rory Christian. He is the chair and CEO of the New York State Public Service Commission. Rory, thank you so much for visiting us in the studio. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And one point of additional clarification that the PSC wanted to add regarding the impact statement. It will take up to a year for the Department of Public Service to complete that review and associated findings, and until it's complete, the moratorium on state permitting for new data centers will remain in place.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by New York State United Teachers, a statewide union of nearly 700,000 professionals in education and healthcare.